There we go. Perfect. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank y'all so much for taking time on this Sunday afternoon to come and learn more about the safety and security efforts that we have here at the church. I'm going to open this with a word of prayer and then hand the mic over to John Lawrence, who will be helping to lead the festivities this evening. So let us pray. And we can mute that live stream if possible. Yeah, okay. All right, let's pray. Good and gracious God, we thank you for the gift of this community and for the faithful and good work that the Committee on Sanctuary is doing to help us continue to live into our mission and our ministry to be a welcoming and open place to worship you, and also to help us balance what it means to be safe and secure in this place. We thank you for the ways that you enable both. And we pray, Lord, that you will bless us in our conversation tonight, that we'll be able to begin to imagine together a new way forward. We ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, John.
Thank you all for being here. About 2 years ago, Session created the Committee on Sanctuary with the intention to look at the safety and security needs of the church and make recommendations for improvements. Dr. Dennis Higdon has been leading our team. Megan Clark brought a passion for children and families. Ann Jones knows every inch of the buildings and campuses here. Jessica Dempster has both coordinated our efforts and kept us connected to day-to-day operations related to the staff and the facility here. As a committee, we've worked with staff to review security firms, their post orders. We've looked into plans and policies of other churches. We've researched how other churches do safety audits themselves internally. We used about every bit of about 18 months and realized we needed professional help in a lot of ways after all of that. Session agreed, and they put us on a path of hiring Insight Intelligence Security. They asked us to conduct a comprehensive safety and security assessment. They wanted help with developing policies and procedures specifically to address findings in that assessment. And then they were looking for, what was next? What else could be part of this? And so we will also talk to you all a little bit today about conducting trainings with staff, members of the congregation, and ministry leaders as we go throughout this process. But this is just the beginning. We want to take action as fast as we possibly can, but we also know that this is a long-term, multi-phased process. It's going to take determination for us to get out of the gates and get started, but we're asking everyone for patience to see this through over the long term. This town hall meeting tonight is really the first step. It's the first step as a community here at Idlewild to defining what a culture of safety really looks like in a place that's as open and welcoming as Idlewild is. We want to remind everybody that we do have a very busy campus. You got about 400 people that are here on Sunday. More than 6 ministries bring another 300 to 500 people through our doors each week, depending on what's going on. As we expand our outreach, invite more people into the church, and really start using the space as everyone intends, those numbers are only going to grow and increase as time goes on. Another thing we want to remind everybody of is that we now have, about 5 ministers, a staff of 15 to 20 people that work for us and with us here at Idlewild that deserve a safe working environment. These are all critical elements of things that are on our minds as we go through this process. But with all that said about the exciting things that are going on here, it's been a tough year or two for us around here in many ways. We've had cars broken into. We've had a car stolen. We've had multiple catalytic converters taken from our church van. There have been thefts from inside the church. We had to locate one overnight intruder with the help of the police department and the K-9 unit. There are a lot of things that have been going on in and around our facility and throughout our community. And while we doubt it'll ever happen to us, we've also been struggling with the proper way to prepare for major violent acts that we've seen happen in other places. So these are the things that are on our minds that are really driving this work. So given the events of the past year, the size of our facility, the breadth of our ministries, Session thought it'd be best if we asked for help, and they were willing to make a significant investment toward that effort, and we're grateful that they have empowered us to move forward. We interviewed 4 firms for this work. 3 had national reputations outside of Memphis. 1 was very specific to facilities here in Memphis. All came highly recommended. We looked for expertise in 7 or 8 categories that ranged from buildings and grounds protection to stakeholder engagement to policy development to training programs. Insight had the best combination of that extensive security background, established processes in place for going through this type of engagement, and the depth of experience specifically with houses of worship. We dealt with some companies and looked at some companies that had a very inside focus, usher trainings and things like that. We looked at others that were very facility focused in terms of, how to protect a school. We were really looking for someone who had the breadth of experience with all aspects from the parking lot to the activities going on in place, from safety and security issues, from a crime perspective to fire protection and health and wellness issues. There were any number of things that were important to us, and we felt like Insight had the best qualifications overall. The company's leadership and primary consultant has proper certifications from the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security. He served as coordinator of security operations at St. Jude, has a Memphis Police Department background. Despite the heaviness of this leadership experience, the company comes at this work through a lens of inclusiveness and openness. They understand that churches are not just special event centers that you can completely shut down and lock down when there's not a big party going on. It's not a place that can 100% be controlled all of the time under every circumstance. They want to make us successful at our mission while also providing a sense of safety, a culture of security here at Idlewild. They work with churches and synagogues around the world. They've completed projects locally with Temple Israel, Second Pres, Bunton Preschool, St. Mary's in Hutchinson, Stacks, community centers, neighborhood associations. They've hit the ground running with us here at Idlewild. They've completed a facility assessment. They've been meeting with staff, and they're here today to talk to you specifically about what to expect as we move forward. There are only a few ground rules for the rest of this meeting. Ann will be fielding questions from our online participants, so we need to allow her to interrupt us from time to time so that they can participate and be part of this. Megan is going to have a microphone, and we have to use it so that those online participants can hear what we're talking about here in the live audience. One other thing, if you think of something after you've left, if you have questions after you've left, if you have a comment that you're not comfortable sharing here today, we are going to set up a very specific safety or security at idlewildchurch.org email address. Once we get that figured out, we will let everyone know so that you can communicate with us afterwards. Stuart Frisch is who I'm introducing today. He will introduce the entire Insight team, talk to us about their process, risks, priorities, possible mitigation strategies. They believe that increasing awareness is as important as securing the boundaries of a facility. And they need to hear more than anything else what is important to us. Stuart left us the other day from a meeting with a humbling thought, the last time we met. He said, "No one wants gates, guards, and guns." And sometimes culture, and that culture of safety, begins simply with hello. So I think we have quite a bit to learn from his experience. I think we really need you all to let him know what we're feeling about safety and security here, what's important to us at Idlewild. And with that, I'll turn this over to Stuart Frisch, President of Insight Security and Strategic Solutions.
Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. This isn't the most uncomfortable microphone setup I've ever worn, but it's in the top 3. Before I start, I'd like to introduce my business partner and the co-owner of Insight Strategic Solutions, Scott Vogel. Scott. So a little bit about the run of show, because while I'm going to do a little bit of talking here, the primary purpose for us sitting here tonight is to hear you, is to hear your questions, preferably the hardest questions you have, what your thoughts are, what you would like to see, what you would not like to see. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to give you a little bit of agenda rundown about what I'll talk about, and then I have set my watch so that I'll shut my mouth as soon as I possibly can, because the most important speakers tonight are you. So what we're going to talk about a little bit, and thank you very much for the generous introduction, is we'll talk a little bit about what the process is for a layered strategic security plan in a house of worship, very similar to what we're sitting in right now, and what the components to a security plan are. We'll talk a little bit about the 2 primary deliverables for our security project with Idlewild, which is, as mentioned previously, the threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment, and the training. And then I'll talk a little bit about how those 2 deliverables fit into the overall project. I'll close with a few thoughts, and then I will quickly as possible shut my mouth and ask you to open yours. So this project began with 2 very simple questions. And the questions that I posed to the leadership of this faith community were, number 1, and speaking from your point of view and not my point of view, what is mine to do? Personally, as a member of Idlewild, what is mine to do with respect to safety, security, and resilience? The second question is, collectively, what is ours to do? What is our responsibility as a faith community to protect not only the people sitting in the pews here on Sunday, on Easter, on Christmas, during our services, but also the future of this faith community for our children and our grandchildren? What is ours collectively to do? And I am of the Jewish faith. I grew up in the small Jewish community here in Memphis, Tennessee. I moved to Israel and served just over 12 years as an officer in the Israeli military immediately after high school. I went to high school here. And so what I kept coming back to was a lesson that I learned during my own Bible studies growing up in the Jewish community here, which comes from the book of Genesis, from the Old Testament. And it's chapter 8. So I know you didn't think there would be an impromptu Bible study, but there is. So if you remember Genesis chapter 8, there's a story about a great flood coming to the earth. Okay? And they built a boat called an ark. The guy who built the boat, his name was Noah. We'll forgive him for not swatting those 2 mosquitoes, which could have made summers in Memphis a lot more tolerable. But the main question is, when I began talking to your leadership, that I posed to your leadership, and then I also posed to myself, and I want to pose to you tonight, is when did Noah build the ark? And of course, the logical answer is before the rain. And as a faith community, we have to be dedicated to building our ark before the rain. That ark looks different depending on what the conversation is. That ark can look like, how are we going to protect our physical grounds? That ark can look like, how are we going to protect our parking lot? That ark can look like, how are we going to protect our processes with respect to our children and our schools and our young ministries? That ark can also look like, are we prepared for our worst possible day ever? Are we prepared for something like the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh saw on October 27, 2018? Are we prepared for something like the Westboro Baptist Church in Texas saw? Are we prepared for something like the Islamic Center in Christchurch, New Zealand saw? For a man with hate in his heart and a gun in his hand to walk in here and do as much damage as they possibly can in as short a time as possible. Are we prepared to both prevent that, to survive that, and then most importantly, as a faith community, to recover from that? And a big part of our project is to answer those questions, not just with training, but with best practice emergency operations plans and assisting with policies and procedures. So our philosophy of security is very simple. It's to answer the two questions, what is mine to do and what is ours to do? And it's, most importantly, it's to take the open, inclusive, and welcoming culture that is Idlewild Presbyterian Church and to help build an invisible bubble around it of safety and security, resilience, so that we can keep this facility as open, welcoming, and inclusive as you want it. Your culture exists within the bubble, and it's our job to help protect that bubble. So our philosophy is not to make changes to your culture. Our philosophy is to identify your culture and then help protect it, and protect it for this generation and also for the next generation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take just a quick rundown of what the components of this layered security plan are. I'll talk a little bit about the assessment. At the request of the leadership, I will run through 4 or 5 of the top line items that we noticed in the assessment, and then we'll talk about what the options for consideration look like and some of the potential recommended infrastructure improvements. I will tell you, and you'll hear this not only in a recursive manner tonight, but you'll hear it in a very recursive manner during the training that we'll be presenting moving forward, that number one, not all problems can be solved by throwing money at them. With respect to providing a sense of safety and security in a house of worship, the most important, the most effective, the most accurate, and the most deadly weapon that we can bring to bear to protect this facility, to protect this community, everybody here already walked in with, and you sat down with it already loaded, and it sits directly between your ears. And so this is a project about mindset and how we begin to think about ourselves and our family and our faith family with respect to safety, security, and resilience. So the way this process worked was very simple, and it looked like a lot of other consultative processes. The first process was identifying of a problem statement from your leadership. Why are we here? What's going on? A lot of the concerns that we saw were linear in nature with respect to traditional linear criminal issues. People are concerned with things that people in Memphis are concerned with at every building. They want to be able to walk to their car safely. They want to be able to get in and out of their car safely and not have it broken into when they come out. They want to have sufficient lighting. They want to make sure that our children are safe when they come here. They want to make sure that if there's a major weather event or there's a natural disaster event, that we have the infrastructure in place to keep people safe and then to recover when it's over. Number 2, after the conversation with the leadership, we embarked, as previously mentioned, on a holistic threat, vulnerability, and risk assessment. And this was looked at from an all threats, all hazards optic. We looked at not only criminal issues, man-made, we looked at natural issues, we looked at weather events, we looked at policies, we looked at traffic flow, both by vehicles and by people. We looked at what it looked like to walk in this building as a stranger. We looked at what it looked like to walk in this building as an employee or as a parishioner. We looked at this building also during the assessment, as most houses of worship are, on primarily 2 tracks. Number 1, a typical Sunday morning when the doors are open and people walk in freely. And then track number 2 is more of a day-to-day business track when people when you're not looking at dozens and dozens of people coming in at once, but you're looking at people coming in singles and in small groups for meetings or for events or for sports events or what have you. Sorry, it's my first day with the new eyes. The third portion of the business process for a layered security plan is what we're doing here tonight, which is socialization across the faith community at Idlewild Presbyterian Church. This is not a process that can happen without ownership and buy-in and skin in the game for not only everybody who's here virtually, not everybody who's here physically, but for the people who couldn't make it as well. This is not a process that will be successful if only 10 people participate in it. This is a process that must be not only re-messaged from this place in this room, but it's got to be re-messaged in your own home. It's got to be re-messaged from parents to children. It's got to be re-messaged from grandparents to family members. This is has to be a community project. And if it's not a community project, then its effectiveness will be limited. So this town hall is really the beginning of making sure that everybody understands what this is and what this isn't. So the socialization for this project really, in a lot of ways, begins this evening, okay? Following the socialization process and the town hall, which is tonight, we'll begin calendaring a series of training events, the training events are national best practice, core competencies of safety and security, and I'll go through each one of those at the end. But the training, again, doesn't live in a bubble. And it's not enough to say, well, I'm gonna come to the training and that's it. The training supports the emergency operations plans. The training is going to support the policies and procedures, where the policies and procedures will be backed up by what we experience in the training. So this is a holistic picture, and all the pieces of this plan click neatly into place with the next one. So what we're asking for participation, okay? We're asking for an open mind, and we're also asking for a critical ear, because at the end of the day, this is yourself and your family that are going to be spending the most time here, okay? Finally, ongoing consultative conversations regarding security posture, services, and infrastructure improvements. So as we look at the assessment, which has recommendations, options for consideration for infrastructure improvements, we'll work through your leadership and your various committees with how to best source and best place infrastructure improvements in and around this building. And I'll go through, in just a minute, specifically what some of those are. So the assessment that was conducted resulted in a document that, correct me if I'm wrong, Jessica, was 71 pages long. So a 71-page document was the result of about a week-long process where we crawled through every inch of this space from top to bottom, and we looked at what policies and procedures you had, and we looked at what policies and procedures we didn't have. It was an outside-in approach, holistic in nature. Most importantly, this is a living document. This is not a document that expires in a year. This is a document that we'll be able to look at in 5 years, and we'll be able to perform an internal gap analysis on where we were in 2023, 2024, and where we are now, okay? All hazards, all threats. This is a document that didn't just identify something like active threat or active shooter issues, or custodial interference issues, or a child being injured. This looked at everything from an earthquake to floods, to civil dissolution, to active threats, to custodial interference, non-parental kidnappings, and everything in between. It looked at physical security infrastructure, how we control access. It looked at how we control visitors, what our visitor management system looks like. So what I'd like to do, with your permission, is I'd like to take 4 of the more top-line items that we saw, options for consideration, and I'd like to go through those and discuss just real briefly how we would work through each one of these. The first thing that we noticed was access control, okay? Now, access control doesn't necessarily mean that we have to keep everybody out or we have to let everybody in. Access control, given the technology available to us, is something that can be user-defined. So we have the ability to define what access control means at Idlewild Presbyterian Church. One of the first things that we noticed that we would like to see is the delineation of public and private spaces within the visitor area. When people walk in on a Tuesday morning through the glass wall and they come up to the main entrance desk, is there an ability that when someone walks in one door, they don't have access to every door? It didn't sit well with me that someone should come to work here and somebody walking in off the street should be able to access every single office and every single space. So the question was, should we be able to separate this church, and mainly not the sanctuary, but the church working spaces, the meeting spaces, into public and private areas that would require additional access control? Once you get in the front door and you're vetted, do you have additional access control needs to get in past that? And what that would allow us to do, that would allow us to say to all of our community, to our visitors, to our employees, to our people coming here for everything from committee meetings to sanctuary events, that not everybody, the FedEx guy walking in off the street doesn't have access to your children or doesn't have access to every single space within this building. And how do we work that? So, number two, and I think that this will probably touch a lot of nerves, is we looked at linear criminal issues with respect to the parking lot and the perimeter. What does the lighting situation look like? Is the lighting sufficient? Is the lighting effective? Do we have effective camera and technology surveillance assets? And if we do have camera and technology surveillance assets, is anybody watching them? Do we have, given the technology available today, we have the ability to put software behind these cameras that can alert us to when something bad is going on. We can put geofences around buildings, we can put geofences around parking lots, and we can have the existing physical security assets that we have in place receive alerts so that we don't have to hire 10 guards. We can leverage technology to maximize what we have now. And what does that look like? Okay. Number three, a mass notification system. In a facility such as this, given the cavernous and the large nature of this facility and the physical footprint that we're looking at, and the fact that we might have, in synchronicity, we might have 5, 6, 7 different groups working, operating, talking, meeting, engaging in prayer, all at the same time on any given day. It's completely within reason that there could be a critical incident taking place in this room, and people on the third floor, 500 feet from here, would have no idea what's going on. So a mass notification system is critical to create instant situational awareness across the physical footprint of this building during a critical incident. What the purpose of this is that they look very similar to, in practice, they look very similar to existing fire alarms, with poles that would not only notify 911, but they would create an audio-visual signal throughout the footprint of this building that would let everybody know that there is a problem and we need to stop what we're doing and we need to address it in an immediate manner. And given the nature, the physical footprint of this facility, that's one of the more critical items that we noticed. And finally, reinforcement of the ground level glass surfaces. I can't stress enough how critical reinforcing our glass is. And it sounds like a small thing until we do just a quick history lesson. And we look at what happened at Sandy Hook Elementary. And we look at what happened at the Covenant School in Nashville. In both cases, glass surfaces became de facto breach points for armed intruders that committed mass murder. We have surface protectors and the technology available at a fairly reasonable price to protect whatever glass we want to put in this building or in any future construction for this building that would prevent glass surfaces from becoming breach points within this building. So what we had in both instances and what we would like to avoid here is having a door that locks down immediately because we saw a problem that was evolving, and that instead of using the door, we had an armed intruder that was able to just shoot through glass and walk through and create any manner of havoc. Yes, sir, I saw you had a question? Excuse me. Reinforcement of ground level glass surfaces. Ground level glass surfaces. Glass walls, large glass windows, glass doors. So what we're trying to avoid is we're trying to avoid glass becoming a breach point into the building, because a lot of times will take it takes a lot of money and a lot of thought to make sure all of our doors are locked, and that's wonderful. And just using a a case history at Sandy Hook School. This is a school that won national awards for active shooter preparation. And they had reinforced doors and reinforced frames and automatic door locks. And as soon as the threat actor began walking towards the school, they locked the school down. What they didn't do is they didn't reinforce their glass. So when the threat actor wasn't able to get through the door, he took 2 steps to the right, put 1 bullet through a glass wall, very similar to what we have here, and used that hole in the glass as a breach point. And we want to avoid that. We want to make sure that glass does not become a entry point for an armed intruder. Okay? Moving on from the assessment to the training. The training we're going to provide is 4 installments of national best practice training that takes this faith community through a contemplated threat to our community, from on the far left side, mitigation, and on the far right side, response, recovery, and resilience. So the training, and I'll name each of the training, and I'll give a brief précis into what the training entails. How this training will be calendared, I believe, is still to be decided, and at what point we're going to start, how it will be delivered, and where it will be delivered. So the first training that we're going to deliver is called Be Aware, which is an introduction to situational awareness. If I was only given one thing to train any faith community on, it would be awareness. Awareness is the foundation, is the touchstone for every security discipline that follows. Being able to disarm danger before it becomes dangerous, to be able to interdict evolving kinetic issues, regardless of at what level, whether we're talking about a purse snatching at a gas pump or an active shooter in the middle of a church on a Sunday morning. Awareness has the ability, and applying awareness disciplines has the ability to interdict danger before it becomes dangerous. So this is training course number 1. Number 2 is a course called The Power of Hello, which is a course about using verbal de-escalation, whether as a member of a greeter usher team or a contact team, or we like to say, and you'll hear it during the training, the first guardians in any society are a mother and father walking out of their house with their children. And so the skill of using the power of hello to verbally de-escalate persons in crisis, potential intruders, any one of a number of issues before it becomes physically violent is a critical component of any safety and security plan, whether that safety and security plan is personal in nature or communal in nature. Okay? Number 3, and as you can see, we're kind of moving across the spectrum, because number 3 is called countering active threat training. Number 3 is assuming that mitigation and the power of hello did not work, and we find ourselves in the middle of a violent critical incident. We teach an hour-and-a-half course, which is a national best practice, where we teach you how to think. Now, what we don't do, to a lot of people's disappointment, is we don't teach you what to think. I can't stand up in the front of a room and choreograph X and O's like a football play and tell you if you're here, then you need to go here. Run, hide, fight is a fluid concept, but we teach the concept of disaster response agnostic of the genesis of the disaster, whether that is an auto accident, a house fire, a purse snatching at a gas station at Kroger, or God forbid, a high-order kinetic violent incident inside the sanctuary of your church. The mental processes that we deal with, denial, deliberation, decisive moment, run, hide, fight, the processes don't change based on what type of emergency we're dealing with. And finally, we teach the American College of Surgeons Stop the Bleed course, which came out as a result of the tragedy at Sandy Hook, where the FBI, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the American College of Surgeons sat at a table in Hartford, Connecticut, with one question in front of them, which is, what skill set can we teach every American to prevent loss of life during a critical incident? And what came out of that meeting was hemorrhage control, stopping the bleed. The good news is that this is a skill that is not strictly related to security. This is a life skill and not a security skill. And we teach, I'm a master instructor for this course, so we teach the American College of Surgeons Stop the Bleed course as the final training, and that wraps up our training curriculum. So as you can see, The conversations with leadership rolling into the assessment, with the results of the assessment informing the construction of an emergency operations plan, informing the construction of policy and procedures, informing the training. And as we wrap up the training, we have to ask ourselves, and this will be kind of the continual quality improvement conversation that we'll have with leadership, is at what point can we consider ourselves at a baseline of standardization for a faith-based security that has received adequate safety, security, and resilience training. And we believe that at this point, that's where we will be. So the things that we envision moving forward are things such as tabletop drills, community safety and security drills, additional training. We don't believe that it's wise to train a community one time and then never again. So baseline as well as recurrent training. This is a process, and this is not a process that will be finished in the first 100 days. This is not a process that will be finished in the first 1,000 days. The assessment is a living document, and the concept of how to secure our faith, our family, our friends, and our children is also a living concept. And it is our intention through partnering with this faith family that we will work through it with you from the inside and not from the outside. So, as promised, plus or minus 30 seconds to 20 minutes is what I promised you. That's my time standard. It's time for me to shut my mouth and for me to hear what's on your mind. Yes, sir. I think we have to pass the mic back to you.
I guess you can hear me. Thank you. I'm Bill Butler, and
yes, sir.
Thank you a lot for coming. It's very interesting. I just wanted to bring up one very specific thing that's been on my mind for
yes,
years. I've been coming here, and that back during the 11 o'clock service, that back area there is wide open, and it scares me to death. It really does.
The back. When you say the back area, what specifically are you talking about?
Yeah, the back.
The front door. Okay, the front door. The door facing Union on the south side.
Yeah, it seems to me it's wide open all the time.
So there's any one of a dozen different ways to solve that problem. And it really depends upon what I don't like to do is I don't like to tell a faith community how they have to secure their church. What I like to do is I like to hear at what level this culture, how much risk we're willing to take on as a culture, and at what level are we looking to secure this church? Because I can tell you something, if Jessica said, you have an unlimited budget, make sure nothing ever happens here, we can build 100-foot cinder block walls and put snipers on the roof, and I swear to you, nothing will ever happen here. But also, we'll not have a single body in these pews ever, because no one wants to. That's not a church, then it's a prison. So, anywhere from creating a contact team or a greeter usher team that can keep their eyes on this door, to having the door open at specific times and not other times, and then there's a couple different ways to solve that problem. But I agree that having your back to an open door, especially given the climate of what's going on in this city and nationwide, is something that we need to look at through our process.
Well, it's just one little thing, and you may have it in your assessment, but
yes, sir.
It has been bothering me for a long time. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
We often have a lot of groups, that use the church facility, which is part of our mission, I guess you'd say, our ministry to, welcome people.
Sure.
Will these processes include sort of how to vet them?
Absolutely.
Going forward, like 12-step groups, whatever it is.
Yes, ma'am.
Things like that. Okay.
So what you're alluding to is a visitor management plan, and that's that was the last conversation we had last week before this meeting. Was we spoke specifically about sports teams. but it could be inclusive of any group that's coming in to use this space. How do we not only vet them, but how do we account for them? And it's important to do so. And not only, yes, it's important to do so for safety and security, but it's also important to do so because it's the right thing to do. Because if, God forbid, there's a fire in this building, the first thing a fire chief is going to ask whoever is responsible here at that moment is the same thing that air traffic control asks pilots when they declare an emergency. How many souls on board? How many souls are in the building? And if we know that we had 15 people here, but we didn't account for the 12-step group that had 30 in the basement, okay, then we haven't done our job. So we have to, as a matter of due diligence, we have to be able to account for everybody where they are or where they could be hiding. If, God forbid, there's an issue, if there's a building collapse, God forbid, we have to start looking for people. We have to know how many people we're looking for and at what point are we done. So it was absolutely part of the conversation, and I think that you'll see some movement on that for sure. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make our mic volunteer run.
Something that I have always wondered about for years. We have had, and we have now, some wonderful people helping us as security guards, and they are great at greeting us and being there when we are coming and going. But I've never known exactly what their role is. For one thing, I'm here often, every week, at night, leaving pretty late. The guard is always still inside the building saying,
Sure.
Okay, goodbye. What really is their role, and what if you had a geofence or you had many cameras and whatnot out in the parking lot and something's happening out there? So then what is the role of the guards?
Sure.
What are they supposed to do about it?
Sure.
And are they armed? I don't know if they're armed or not.
So I think it's a good time to, and I'm not sure if this is the forum to have that conversation, but it's a good time to have a conversation, if not now, then in the near future, about what are the realistic expectations with respect to guards, both unarmed and armed. And what is the difference between safety and security? And what is the difference between safety, security, and a concierge service? And what do we expect our guards to be doing? What is the primary function of a guard? I believe the primary function of a guard, especially at a house of worship, is to be a trained observer and a trained communicator. What I don't expect is I don't expect an unarmed guard with no body armor or no training to insert themselves in the middle of a high-order kinetic incident. I don't believe being an unarmed security guard is a suicide pact. I believe that we can't expect this person to run in front of, God forbid, a crazy person who comes in with a semi-automatic rifle and starts shooting people. That's not their job. But that leads itself to another question of what is their job. And I believe in the document that you're alluding to is called post orders. And post orders is the document that basically says what should the guard be doing, where should the guard be, what happens if, then what, and it's kind of like what their script is for what should they be doing while they're at work. I believe best case scenario for the guard that we have here is that guard should be a trained observer and a trained communicator. If done right, that guard should be able to see evolving incidents and be able to communicate inside as well as to 911 that we need some more help. Okay? The one thing that I like to remind people, and you hear this again during training, is that if you take any one of, in the last 20 years, of the most horrific active shooter incidents, especially in houses of worship, and you look at it from a third-person perspective like you're watching a movie, at one point, the only thing we have that we're looking at is a person parking a car in front of a church or a mosque or a synagogue, parking their car, getting a gun out of the trunk, and walking to a door. If we can stop that film right there before anybody gets hurt, then we're on a different calculus and a different slide rule than what Tree of Life saw and what Christ Church New Zealand saw and what Westboro Baptist Church saw. So what part does the guard play in that theater of events? And in my opinion, that guard should be the first phone call. That guard should be the first one pushing a panic button. That guard should be letting people know that we need to run, hide, or fight. It's my belief that when we're dealing with a facility such as this, and to the gentleman, I believe he left to the gentleman's concern about sitting here on a Sunday morning with the door open. Once an armed intruder enters the building, we're on the calculus of lose-lose. We're going to lose big or we're going to lose little, but we're going to lose something. So the only way to stay off that slide rule is to not let these threats inside our building. That's the only way. It's a win-lose situation. We have the option of not losing. And I think that the guard plays a critical role in that, and that role is communication and observation.
Stuart, I want to interrupt for just a minute. I know that Pastor David had his hand up, and he gets priority whenever he wants it. And I know online we have some questions.
Sure.
So we'd like to take
Yep. Who's going first?
You want it online? Okay.
Online.
So the question came in during the conversation about reinforcing the glass.
Yes.
And in terms of that, how do you balance keeping the bad guys out with the need to evacuate? For example, would it be like a plane where we have emergency exits, or that sort of thing? So that's the question.
So reinforcing our glass does nothing to change in any way current exit strategy. Doors, the fire marshal will not allow us to hinder egress from our facility in any way. What we can do is we can hinder ingress. And ingress is why we're reinforcing the glass. So the answer is the two concerns are not connected. By reinforcing our glass, we're not changing our emergency evacuation in any way.
Well,
more?
and the follow-up to that is during, say, a lockdown. But I believe the same answer would apply during a lockdown where we lock people out. People still can get out of the building per
absolutely.
normal. Got it.
And it's interesting. It's an interesting comment because the concept of a lockdown isn't what it used to be. There's a lockout. There's a difference, and you'll hear this during the training. There's a difference between a lockdown and a lockout. A lockout is we lock all of the perimeter doors and our pastor continues business as usual. We don't have to be hiding and running and looking for safe rooms and looking for fire extinguishers to fight with. A lockout, when would we do a lockout? If the Memphis Police Department was conducting a vehicle chase of a bank robber up and down Union Avenue and they had fired shots at the police like we had a couple years ago. I know that because my daughter was at Ballet Memphis and they were hiding in bathrooms. Okay, that's when we would do a lockout. Okay, lock all the doors, business as usual inside. A lockdown, which is part of run, hide, fight, is an individual, decentralized concept that we do not do communally. Okay, because the very first thing that we should do as a result or as a reaction to danger is we should be where the danger isn't. Okay, so lockdowns are good, but if you can leave, you shouldn't have to lock down. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Sir, did you have a...
I just want to speak to a couple things that have already been brought up. Bill's question, I think, is a really important one. And it comes from us not having a more in-depth and broader conversation as a congregation. So we have made changes to the doors in the narthex on a Sunday morning. So those doors that face Union are not unlocked anymore on a Sunday. Maybe some of y'all are nodding your heads, you're aware of that. Our Garth door and the door that's on Auburndale are open. We open them at a particular time. And we also now have 3 guards on campus on a Sunday morning. And one of those guards is to make their presence known in the narthex, but mostly around the narthex area during worship. So that's an important thing to know. And then to Nancy's question about post orders, or you actually mentioned post orders, Stuart, you should be aware that the Committee on Sanctuary has rewritten the post orders for our guards. and they'll continue. That's an evolving thing that will continue to happen as we get further in our conversation. And a point of clarity, Stuart did speak to it, but we have unarmed guards. That has been the policy up until this point here at Idlewild. So that's just for y'all's information.
I have another online question.
Yes, ma'am.
The question is, are our emergency exits in the sanctuary adequate? And if not, one, what is needed to improve them? And two, what might the likely cost be?
Well, the final question is the easiest to answer, always, because the answer is I have no idea. Because I'm not a door. I would have to talk to Dillard Door about that. I believe that the emergency exits are sufficient. I believe that what's insufficient is people's understanding of where all the exits are. And I think that as a part of the training that we need to make sure that we have somebody who either works here at facilities or is intimately familiar with this building to make sure that people know where all the exits are and that not all the exits are doors. A lot of times, and to that question, all you have to do when you go home is Google the following phrase: station nightclub fire. Google that when you go home. Station nightclub fire. That was a nightclub in the Midwest several years ago that suffered. They had a bad fire due to some pyrotechnics during the great paragon of American music. Whitesnake was performing there, right? And dozens of people lost their lives because they didn't know where the emergency exits were, and the emergency exits that did exist were untouched. And everybody tried to run out the door they came in. So a big part of the training, especially on the awareness side of the house, is making sure that people know how to get out if they have to go, and that not all exits are doors. But I believe that we have sufficient ways out of this building. I mean, that was one of the things that our assessor noticed. Sir? Sure. Exit signs are things that we need to work around with respect to how to wire a building of this age. Are those things that need to have batteries that can be replaced? When you start drilling holes in 100-year-old buildings, there's always some questions about how that works. And I imagine when we start looking at things like mass notification systems and cameras, we're going to have some interesting hurdles that we're going to have to overcome. But those hurdles are not insurmountable, I'm sure. Yes, sir. And then in the back.
Two questions. One is the mass notification. How would that originally work? Would you just have everybody set up on an email? And
No. The way this works is this is not for people at home finding out that something is going on in church. This is for the people who are physically present within the footprint of this building, no matter where they are, whether they're on the third floor in the library or they're sitting in this building. If somebody walks through the front door, by the front glass door with a gun and starts shooting, that once that mass notification system is engaged, and it's engaged in one of two ways. It's engaged either through a pull station that's blue that looks very similar to a fire alarm, or through a panic button on a lanyard. Once that is engaged, a couple things happen. We have audio signals through speakers that tell us that there's a problem that we need to attend to. And it can say whatever we want it to say. It can say run, hide, fight. It can say active shooter. It can say code red. It can say whatever we want it to say. And also visual signals, especially, in an age of technology where a lot of people, especially our young ones, may have AirPods or headphones in, where you can see a blue flashing strobe that says, hey, look, I don't know what's going on, but I need to stop. And the reason that it works that way is because what we found statistically during fire alarms, especially fire alarm drills, and I don't know if anyone's ever been in a fire alarm drill when it's going on, like in a gym or in a store or something. Statistically, do you know what people in fitness facilities do when the fire alarm goes off? They turn the volume up on their AirPods because that thing is super annoying and they don't want to hear it, and they just keep going on the treadmill. People don't pay attention to these alarms because, number one, they don't know what it is. And that's a big reason why we're having this meeting here tonight, is to socialize what our intentions are. So it creates instant situational awareness. It is not a community alert system. It is strictly for active threat and strictly for physically in this building.
The other question had to be, if we get into one of those lose-lose situations, I know this is a gun-free zone, but has it ever been reconsidered that there would be armed security in some form?
It's an excellent question. It's an excellent question. Did everybody hear the question? Okay. The question was, if we do have a situation where we have an armed intruder inside the footprint of this building, has it been considered that we would have armed security instead of unarmed security, or was that another part of your question? No, your word. Okay. Sure. So yes and no. We have to have a very realistic conversation about what our expectations are, even for armed security. Okay? Armed security, the most armed security that we have, the most common armed security we have, is the exact same fit and feel for unarmed security with just the addition of a firearm. Notice I didn't say a firearm and body armor. Notice I didn't say a firearm and distraction devices, or a firearm and handcuffs, or a firearm and an emergency communication device, or a firearm and a tourniquet. There are certain equipment and training things that armed guards just don't receive. Realistically, what the private security regulatory agencies in America, specifically ASIS, have kind of come to the realization that unless you were talking about off-duty armed law enforcement as your armed security, which is a whole separate conversation, an armed security guard is that weapon is for personal defense purposes, and they are neither trained nor equipped, either from a mindset or a training point of view, to interdict in high-order kinetic violent incidents. Now, if the Committee on Sanctuaries came and said, look, we want to hire off-duty Memphis Police and Shelby County Sheriff's deputies, that's a whole separate conversation, because they are equipped to do that, and there is an expectation that they will do that. But that's another level of budgetary commitment, and it's another level of moving up kind of that spectrum.
A follow-up on that would be, I know some churches, they have members that have gone through that kind of training.
Sure.
And usually they're ex-law enforcement.
Sure, ex-law enforcement, retired military.
And that would be, to me, that'd be a possibility, because I know certain pastors that, like, are high target, if you will.
Sure.
They have armed security with them. And I'm not saying we do it all the time, but certainly on a Sunday morning, and very discreet, obviously, to meet our mission.
Sure.
So
I can tell you, I've worked with houses of worship that have gone in that direction, and I've worked with them that have looked at that very hard and have decided not to. I can tell you that that's probably a much more in-depth conversation than we want to have here. There are pros and cons to both sides of that decision point, and primarily from a liability standpoint. There's a much more involved discussion that would have to be had with your leadership, with your insurance underwriter, and with your legal counsel. Because at that point, this church as a business entity is taking on a level of liability and risk that is completely different in comprehension from what we are now. And then there's some, from my side of the house, there's pros and cons to move in both ways. But I am aware of a lot of churches and synagogues and whatnot that have gone down that road. So I'm not opposed to it, but it's a tread carefully, young man thing. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Kirk Bobo. I'm the chair of House and Properties. I just want to make a clarification about the narthex. The exiting going through the doors in the front, leads to a door with a panic bar on it. And that means the door can be locked from the outside, but
But you
still
can push
allow for egress
Crash bar,
out.
right.
That's not what we have in the Narthex. The doors there are deadbolts. They're either open or locked, and when they're locked, you can't get out.
It doesn't
or
matter
in.
how, right.
So I just wanted to make that point that there's work needs to be done there in order to make them where you can lock them at a certain time to avoid entry,
Okay.
but you're not locking them for
And I believe that
egress.
was noticed in our assessment.
Right.
Okay.
And the other thing is that we are experimenting with exit signs that are called photoluminescent,
Yes, sir.
meaning that the
familiar.
sign can be charged by a light shining on it
Yes, sir.
and not have to be, because wiring is a big problem with exit signs in a building like
can
this.
imagine.
But there are some things like that that we can do. But the work is going to need to be done out there. I just wanted to clarify that right now it's either we lock out, and when you lock out, you lock in. And we've got to make it where you can keep people from coming in, but not keep people from getting out in the case of an emergency.
Fantastic. Good information. Thank you, sir. Any other?
So much of what I've heard today, this is heavy stuff. We're talking about violence. We're talking about mass destruction. This has been a really heavy conversation. And I want to assure everyone that the Committee on Sanctuary is also very conscious of how we really use this space and the people that are here on a daily basis. That there are invited guests here that have great vulnerabilities. There are people that come in here to eat with us, to take a break from their hard life. There are people that come here that are women escaping domestic violence that need a place to sleep for the night. There are youth groups and college groups that are going across the country and they're going to sleep in here alone by themselves from time to time. There are vulnerable groups that are here that we intend to use this facility, that we need to understand how we're expected to behave around them. We need to understand how they're expected to behave while they're here. And we need to think through very consciously how we protect one another throughout this experience. And so I'd hate for this meeting to wrap up with, just a discussion on a great catastrophe or a discussion on somebody busting through the door that really wants to do great harm to all of us, because there are so many other nuanced situations that we are going to have to grapple with in the coming weeks, months, years as part of this. So I just wanted to introduce that because this was weighing on me as we were all talking, because I thought we might go there with more of this. But there are people that are involved in this process that range from lock it down to keep it all open for everybody all the time, and we are going to have to figure out how to land somewhere in the middle as we develop this culture of safety and security, and I just wanted to introduce that before we wrapped up. If no one else has anything, David, you want to close us out?
I just think you hit on a couple key words. First of all, as Stuart makes his way, can we just applause for him, gratitude for his work and Insight's work. A couple words that you used there are really important for us, John. This idea of tonight for us marking the beginning of a really important shift in culture around safety and security here at our church. And hopefully just with the words that John just shared with you and with the other work that has been done, Stuart's measured remarks as well, you understand the seriousness with which we are balancing how it is we continue to faithfully live out the calling of Jesus Christ, and also do so in a world that has some difficult realities for us to navigate. But tonight, the 50 of y'all that are in this space and the many who have joined online, you are part of the beginning of a brand new conversation here. And so what we need to know is that this conversation will, for all intents and purposes, continue in perpetuity. This conversation will not come to an end until thy kingdom come. And so we need to understand that not only is it the beginning of a conversational shift, we'll be talking more about it, you'll be hearing more from the Committee on Sanctuary about it. It's also the beginning of a financial commitment that started with our session many months ago as we began to have a relationship with Insight. That will need to continue to evolve financially as well. There's a commitment as it relates to our guards and the investment that we make, over $100,000 that we spend each year on unarmed guards, and what that looks like for us as we move forward, cameras and technologies and all those sorts of things. But y'all are here. Your presence is part of the beginning of a really important and necessary shift in how we understand and practice safety and security here. So thank you for your presence. For those who are online, thank you for joining us there. We named a number of different things in the life of the church that we love and we appreciate. And one thing we haven't mentioned, but I just want to say a word of gratitude to Vicki Cox for being here, is that we have an entire early childhood education center that we helped to birth into the world and that we have responsibility for. And so the work and the investments that we will make here in doing this work will also help protect the children that are entrusted to the care of the EEC every day. We want to make sure we're aware of that as well. Friends who are online with us, thank you for being here. If you have other friends, if you're present here and have friends that weren't able to be present, weren't able to log on, the live stream will live on our website for a long time. As John mentioned at the beginning of our time, there will be the creation of an email address where additional questions can be sent. We understand that there will be many more. And so you'll be able to send those. And what we're really appreciative of Insight, and particularly Stuart, for is that this is not only the beginning of a new relationship for our church as it relates to safety and security, but a new relationship with Insight. They're going to be with us. They're going to be walking alongside us in this journey, helping to ensure that we feel that we are as prepared as we need to be to live out our mission and to do it safely and well. If there are no other conversations or questions, I'll close this with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of this community. And we give you thanks for the gift of this physical space that you have given to us. And we pray, Lord, for the beginning of a new and vital conversation. We pray, Lord, for all of the work that has already been done by our Committee on Sanctuary and all the work that lies ahead. We thank you for the work of our House and Property Committee and the work that will lie ahead for them. And we thank you for Stuart and for Insight and for all those who have devoted time and energy to help us discern the ways in which you're calling us to live out our mission here. Bless us and bless our community, God, as we go into this evening. Grant us safety and grant us grace as we move through the world. We ask it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. And friends, you may go in peace.